time grief we go. Gotta learn to let it go. Once asleep, now awake, feeling every breath you take.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alex and David Long, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential selves so that they can stop sleepwalking through life. Our goal is to create a safe space where our guests can share how they've decided to wake the F up and become mindfulness experts through their own emotional healing journey.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast. I'm your host, co-host, only host today, David Long. And I'd like to introduce what I hope will be, and I'm sure will be, a very special episode, something we've never done before on the podcast. Have, number one, more than one guest. Number two, myself leading or guiding. I'm not leading. I'm just here to guide and to listen. But in the spirit of Man Month, we brought four, if you include myself, very diverse men experiences. I think we have young, middle-aged, old. We have lots of different experiences, different life experiences that I think will be great. And we're gonna try to kind of keep it loosely within the spirit of masculinity and what that means, and we'll get into more detail about that later, but I just want to introduce everybody briefly and then have everybody introduce themselves. On the top right with a fresh haircut, we have Andrew, who has been behind the scenes of our podcast for almost since the beginning, editing, and does a really wonderful job. He's got a lot of energy and is very approachable, and Alex loves working with him. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say. On the bottom right, we have Earl. Earl is my age. He's 49. He lives in New Orleans and has had some pretty interesting life experiences as a man, young man, and now an older man. And then we have Lou in the bottom left, who has also had some, interesting life experiences, and we can't wait to hear what he has to say in his perspective of Man Month and what that means to everybody here. So with that, does anybody have anything else to say? Andrew, would you like to say a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you're here?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I hopped on the Wake team a little over a year ago. It started off just by editing some random videos, different videos that Alex was creating, and then that kind of just evolved into Alex asking me to do more, and I just kept saying yes to doing all of it. So now I edit all the podcast. I will edit any other videos that is asked of me to do. On the Instagram, if you hear the music that is being made that is the original audios, I've made those beats as well, the lo-fi beats and some different soundscapes. Outside of that, I am a full-time digital media creator. I make videos for other businesses and a bunch of people in general. But Wake has now been my longest people that I've been with, and it's been awesome.
Perfect. Well, it's going to be great to have you on this side of the conversation, which will kind of be fun, I think, for everybody. All right, Earl, anything would you like to say who you are, why you're here?
How y'all doing? Yes, my name is Earl Hagans. I'm a formerly incarcerated person, and the formerly incarcerated person is it goes a bit deeper than just being incarcerated in prison. The physical building, the structure. Um, it was after I got out, I realized that formerly incarcerated had so many different meanings, because I had become free spiritually and mentally, and different facets and aspects of my life had just become wide open. So the formerly incarcerated piece was something that folks were working on while I was in prison. When I got out, I got involved in the fight of helping other formerly incarcerated people, and it just started to take new meaning. So, but we'll get more into that. But that's just a small. If I was if Forrest Gump was a black dude, I would consider myself to be that person. So I've had. It's funny you say interesting. It's definitely been an interesting journey for me. So I'm happy to be here.
Very good. Well, we're glad to have you. And Lou, would you like to say anything about yourself, who you are, why you're here?
I'm Lou. I am also from New Orleans, but I currently live in New York State. And I, just like Wayne Taylor, am part of the Wake team. My friend is the photographer and kind of content filmer for Wake. And having worked with her previously in a salon environment and different professional environments, she asked me if I was interested in a position that Wake was offering, and I hooked up with Alex, and it kind of took off from there. And now I'm a web developer, uh, and I kind of fell in love with the mission, which is healing. To me, healing trauma that is such a prevalent, issue. I think among more people than they realize. And so becoming involved with it, and then saying yes to this podcast, I thought it was going to be a really really cool experience.
Yeah, very good. Well, we're glad to have all of y'all here. I'm not going to lie to tell you that I'm a little bit nervous about this. And I'm hoping that, I won't come off like an idiot. But one of the cool things, like you mentioned, Lou, is for me, when I was not paying attention, I really didn't know about trauma. And that's not to say that there wasn't trauma. I just wasn't acknowledging it. And you just don't look around you and see all the things that people are going through as kind of a protective mechanism for yourself, But then once you get cracked open, like Earl said, you really start to notice that there's a lot of people out there. And when I say a lot, I mean, it's kind of everybody that has at least some trauma and some um, something in their history or their current situation. And it's been super interesting for me with the Wake journey to hear other people's stories and to realize that my story is traumatic and sucky, but really one of a lot of life stories, that are traumatic, and that's it really is part of life. And to deny it is kind of part of the problem, actually. So today we're going to try to focus on masculinity. It's Man Month. And I'm super curious to get each and every one of y'all's thoughts and discussions on a couple of topics that we've kind of narrowed down because obviously the four of us could probably talk a lot about a lot of stuff. So we're going to try to keep it a little bit focused, but saying that if we veer off like Alex and I usually do, that's okay. We'll just try to let it go where it goes. So I think in the spirit of Man Month, and this is something that I'm just starting to kind of explore, to be totally honest with you, I've never really considered what it means to be a man until extremely recently. Um, and I don't know why that was other than, um, I mean, probably multifactorial. Number one, nobody asked. Number two, it's it's socially it's a tricky subject because there's a lot of baggage to being a man, unfortunately or fortunately. And also there's a pretty strong tradition in my mind socially of men not really talking about their feelings. So all of that really played into me never really wondering what it means to be masculine. Now we've already talked on the podcast. Alex and I are using this therapist slash shaman slash amazing genius, and she has a real sense for what it means to be a man. Now the good news from a therapy point of view, because we do um, couples therapy with her, is that it doesn't excuse but it explains a lot of your kind of basic impulses as a male, as a man, um, which can be kind of interesting, like putting into perspective what you think, what you want, that you have never really thought about, that really is just part of masculinity and being a man. So that, but I do think in talking to guests and to myself and to other people, it means a little bit different to every person. You know what I mean? Like some people you say, what's it mean? What's masculinity mean to you? And they'll say, well, a father or some people might say, strength or protection, or these are kind of some basic masculine. So I would like to know what each one of you, and I'll start with you, Earl, um, because I hate going in order. So we're gonna flip it around. What have you ever thought about what masculinity is, what it means, where it comes from, and if you have, what does it mean to you, and why?
Uh, um, as today, um, with the journey I've been on, it's sort of a loaded question now. What is a man? Because the thing that I was taught as a man from my dad, from society, it's that those aspects have been shattered, and I'm definitely confused, not as far as sexual orientation, but it's a shattered image of what a man is supposed to be, because you're not supposed to cry. You know, man take care of household. Man, this is the man's world. And but as it stands today, it's a question that I'm continuing to answer on a daily basis, because when I got married, my wife asked me this question. She said, "What's your meaning of a husband?" Like, I don't know, because of the norm of what a husband is supposed to do. Like, I don't know, because of all the outside noise that I had been uh, taken in. It it is definitely a question that I'm continuing to answer on a daily basis. If I had to just be if I just had to give you a answer that just to satisfy that question right now, would be um I'm a bearded person. That makes me a man. You know what I mean? But to answer it, I it's an ongoing thing that is always something new that I have to do as a man.
Mhm. Well, I think you actually started with a great answer, which I think is the beginning of a lot of self-awareness for men, or for really anybody. I mean, this is kind of almost universal. But to begin with the statement of "I don't know," that's like the most critical, maybe one of the most critical parts. Last time we were talking on the podcast about, after my wife died, I would find myself staring in the mirror a lot and asking, who am I looking at? Who is this person looking back at me? And that does like tie into the man thing, because you're kind of shedding what my dad taught me was a man, what my mom taught me was a man, what my wife expected me to be as a man, and you get this fresh look of, and the overwhelming answer when I looked in the mirror was, I don't know. I don't know who this person is. And actually, I honestly think that is a great place to start, right? I mean, and it just sucks that I started that at 46. Would have been great. Would have been great to start that journey of discovery early, but at least it happened. So I think asking yourself, "Who are you?" and is a great place to start to discuss really anything, but in particular masculinity, where there's so much baggage of what society expects. Because if you don't answer the question for yourself, or at least leave it open, people are right there ready to answer for you. This is what's a man? A man gets up and goes to work 8 hours a day. And what's a man? A man pays the mortgage. Okay, okay. There's all kinds of what's a man? Oh well, in the missionary position, the man's on the top. You know what I mean? It's there's all these rigid, very rigid, can be very rigid definitions. Yeah, Lou, go ahead.
Predictably, I think as a trans man, my answer is pretty complex. But it begins with the fact that I was surrounded with such incredible men growing up. Um, and I really love that the idea of masculinity, well, I love and I hate it, that the idea of masculinity is so objective. It's really about, like nurture. And I was very gratefully born into a family where my father was absolutely, I think he's the best man on the planet. I think he is a paragon of strength, emotional, physical, familial, like everything. And part of his heritage plays into that. My dad's side's mostly Filipino. And the emotional connection between people in Filipino families is so strong, and that vulnerability is truly there. He was raised in a family that encouraged expression of feelings and affection and everything like that. And so I was raised with a dad like that who really was okay with being vulnerable. And that experience as a kid to see a father figure and a man that was completely okay with behaving in that manner and supporting other men who behaved in that manner and seeing how well it was received. You know, my dad is one of those guys that if he was the boss of somebody in his department, his employees would thank him for just being the man he was. Um, and so I had that example. And growing up, you know, I was not a self actualized trans guy, but I always looked at my dad as a role model. And I realize now, as an adult who's out as a trans man, you know, everything like that, that that is the origin and the core of everything I aim to be. And I'm just really grateful for that experience because, you know, especially in the South in New Orleans, there are a lot of men that could have grown up and did grow up exactly like Earl with all those, you know, Southern expectations of men, which is not to say anything else for the rest of the country and what masculinity is for them and everything like that. And uh, definitely feel like a lucky exception, um, but also really grateful one that's happy to, you know, try to encourage other men to behave with authenticity.
Great response. And I don't think that we can talk about masculinity and not talk about our dads. Even if you've lost your dad, I can see, you know, from my stepchildren, um, it's an amazing influence. It can be amazing, both positive and negative. Unfortunately, it's not always positive. It's great when it's positive, um, but the influence is powerful, positive or negative. Dads have a particularly strong influence, even in their silence, and even in, you know what I'm saying. They don't even have to really say anything or even particularly do anything. Um, it can be very powerful, and that doesn't uh, by any stretch diminish the role of the female role in the family can be equally empowering. But I think from a masculine point of view, all of us are influenced by our dads, and that's just the reality of it. Um, for me personally, that was kind of a shedding thing, you know, just kind of feeling that influence and discarding it. I don't know if that was your experience or not, Earl. And that's very hard to do because I don't want to do that. But when you look at the influence, you have to name it for what it is, you know. And if that influence is negative or not protective or not good, then it's got to be let go. But it's still an influence, right? It still defines who I am, which is weird. What about you, Andrew?
So growing up, I never saw much masculinity in life in general. My parents had me when they were teenagers, and at a very early age, my dad got into a car wreck, survived, but he was on a lot of drugs whenever it happened. So he ended up he was in the back seat and nobody had their seatbelts on, and one of his friends actually landed on him and smothered him. He stopped breathing once while in the car while it was flipped. They brought him back to life, and then the same thing happened again in the ambulance and then also at the hospital. So he ended up having brain surgery and kind of forgot everything at that point for a while. He started to kind of regain memory a little bit and whatnot after a while, but that was very tough. So he was never really around a lot. There was only one person in my life that I ever looked at as an actual potential positive role model, and it was my cousin's boyfriend whenever they were 18 and I was 13. He his grandfather was in the war, and then his dad was in the war, so his entire life mission was to go be in the army. I only met him a few times, but I remember the very first time that I ever met him, he came over to our house, and I remember thinking that is what I want to look up to, because I saw the way that he spoke not only to me while not really knowing me as a kid, him also being a kid, he was only 18, but also the way that he spoke to anyone with respect towards men and women, towards anyone. He helped us clean our house for no reason, just because he was there. He taught me things about life that my mother was not able to do. One of just how to be a good friend to someone, but also the thing that I enjoy the most about masculinity is the fact that you are allowed to be vulnerable, but not reactive to your own emotions. And I think with that, you get to become a virtuous man. You're at least able to. You have the option to choose that, anyways. So, along with the whole, I know that there's this huge push of like men need to talk about their emotions. We need to hear more of men's emotions. Um, but honestly, I don't think, like, I think, yeah, like talk about emotions as you need to. But I also believe that as uh, a way to lean into masculinity, I think you're allowed to have your emotions, but um, if it's not necessary for the moment, then maybe there's no reason to try to force speaking about emotions. Again, I just kind of lean back into like trying to be. Maybe I kind of overly lean into being a productive individual, and I tend to really consistently push away the emotions that I don't feel are necessary, so I can get the job done, which I think is possibly a common thing as a man.
I would actually say that it's a defining feature, and very, very different, um, from the female perspective of yeah, Lou, one sec. Very, very different. But yeah, I 100% sympathize with that thought. That you know, I think the slippery slope of that is that as life gets more complicated and as we get older and there's more stresses, um, it is more and more tempting to avoid more and more of the emotions because just like you said, they're hard and they do seem, or they, at least on the surface, it feels like they kind of get in the way of doing what you feel a deep need to do, like you said, be productive and all that kind of stuff. The truth is, none of those things are mutually exclusive. I've learned this in the last 4 years. I felt exactly the same way that if I let those really in, I still sometimes feel this way. Like I can't let my kids feel this way. My boys feel this way. That if they really let in these hard emotions, that they won't be able to fulfill their other basic drives. And I thought that most of my life, until I let them in. And then when I let them in, there is a cracking and there's a breaking. And was I as productive as I could have been right after my wife died? No, definitely not. I didn't go to work much. And you know what? It was okay. It was okay. So I felt all the things. And now I would say I have almost no filter on them at all. I literally just let them come in, and it's wonderful. It doesn't keep me from doing what I want to do at all. In fact, on a daily basis, it helps me connect, to strangers and to my wife and my children. And some people might look at me and be like, and Alex even kind of says, you cry a lot. I was like, yeah, I do. I cry a lot. I feel a lot, and that's okay. I'll cry on the way to work sometimes. No particular reason, just sad song comes on the radio. If it's sung right, you cry,
See, I want to say that I'm not like, let me push down my emotions and never feel them, because I am also a very emotional individual. I was only raised by women. I think I just don't enjoy making emotional reactions to situations. If that can cause an output or an outcome that's different from me making a logical, or let me just take a minute to think about this response, I think,
Well, first of all, I've definitely noticed, and I think everybody here can agree that um, the uptake of emotions is dramatically different from for a man, and it's generally slow. I mean, Alex gets things like bam, 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 and she'll say, "How do you feel?" I'm like, I have no idea how. I don't know. I feel something, but I don't really. And then maybe it takes an hour or 6 hours or maybe even 24 hours, and you're like, damn, shit, you are feeling it, but we just process shit slower. 100%. But again, um, that's that's a very, in my opinion, a very masculine approach. That logic, like logic. When I list like what it means to be a man, logic is definitely on there. We want to live logical. It's just unfortunate that the world is, in fact, in my opinion, not logical. And yeah, go ahead, Lou. I wanted to come to you anyway. Go ahead, Lou.
I just am sitting here just listening to you guys talk about this back and forth. I think it's so funny that, doing this podcast, I'm coming in here with, just like all of us, a preconceived idea of what we think masculinity is, or what we think being a man is. And it's funny to relate to what everyone is saying in the way is like, as a trans guy, as a trans guy, and I've been in therapy since the age of 14. So I have this experience separate from, being on testosterone, which has changed my thought process, how my brain functions, everything like that. Um, and I still am somebody that has conversations with my fiance, and she'll be like, "How do you deal with these feelings?" And I'm just like, "It doesn't serve me, so I have to move on." Like, what is the point in dwelling in this emotion, um, if it's not going to serve me? There are too many other things in life going on, or that might be coming up in the future, or anything like that, for me to dwell on this one feeling. And there's nothing I can do about it. So I just let it go. And again, in the same turn, it's like, I do believe I've been in therapy long enough. I've been receiving mental health treatment long enough, and also have, the experience as having previously presented as female, that like I have that kind of like attunedness that you mentioned Alex having, where she's able to identify her emotions a little bit more quickly. Um, it's just that for me, it looks a lot like I'm able to identify them and identify that I can't do anything about them very quickly. So I tend to jump from, oh, here's the problem. Well, it's nothing I can do about it, so I'm going to move on to the next moment in my life. And that for me takes about like 60 seconds, because that's just what happens.
It takes me longer, and I do think that is definitely a goal. Like that's one of my goals is to feel. I want to feel it all, right? And then I want to be able to let it go and move on. Go ahead, Earl.
One of the things I've gotten better at, and it comes from the uh, the role model I got from my dad, is that he spent his entire life not expressing how he felt or feel. Even when he was hurt, he still got up every morning and went to work. And I believe we just lost him a couple months ago, and I believe because he was that role model for me, I believe his life was shortened. It could have been longer. We could have had him longer if he not have been expressive with how he was, you know. And and I saw this like at the end of his when he was transitioning, how even even when he was going through what he was going through, the most you could get out of him when he was in pain was, oh. And I mean, you could actually see he was in some pain. He could not even, his limbs were in a position to where he couldn't bend them. And when you would move them, you could see he was in agony where his face was scrunched up. But the most you got out of him was, oh, and I don't know at what point I actually looked at my pops and I said, I have to be more expressive with my emotion. Now, granted, I don't always do it, you know what I mean? Because I'm, logical thinking, you know what? Take the emotions out of this and just tackle what the problem is. You could be mad about it later on, you could be upset about it, but right now you need to tackle this thing. And sometimes I shift all that aside and just fuck everything up. You know what I mean? With my emotions. But at the end of the day, I watched my dad go through it and I was like, oh, I see what that is, because and with the journey, I started reading about stress and what it does to the body and all these things, and I'm like, damn, that was something I learned from him, Like I said, he I can't help but to go back to that. What's a man? What's masculinity? Is a man supposed to just stuff his feelings on the side and just tackle that problem? I don't know, because that shit, seeing my dad go through what he went through at the end of his life, and I'm only speculating. I believe if he was more expressive with whatever he was going through, we could have had him here a bit longer, So yeah.
Yeah, that's actually something I never believed in. As a medical doctor, I just did not accept that your emotional um, being and your emotional capacity had physical consequences. For whatever reason, I just didn't believe in it. But there's been way too much evidence in my life now that I can see that really. And if you ask me the connection, like, well, what's Dr. Long? What's the connection? I don't know. I mean, it's this amorphous. I don't know, but there does seem to be an undeniable connection between your physical well-being, and I'm including things like cancer, heart attacks. Because when I was training, they used to always say, well, one of the causes of a heart attack is stress. Really, well, okay, well, what is stress? You know what I mean? That's so. I mean, I think if you shove down your emotions, that causes stress, and if we know there's a medical connection between stress and heart attacks, why would it stop there? Why my wife had a brain aneurysm and died, I don't know. Was it because she was emotionally very closed off and unhappy? I don't know. Alex's husband had super high stress, this executive chef, and had a ton of stress. Does that cause cancer? I don't know, but it sure seems to have a connection. And at minimum, what I would say, to people like your dad is, even if we're wrong, like even if like your emotional well-being doesn't actually affect your medical or physical being, which would you rather be in a time of pain? You know what I mean? I personally would rather be more connected and more aware of what's going on in my brain and body and heart, than trying to shove it down, and sharing is a huge part of that, right? I mean, sharing your pain and sharing your story. That's this whole podcast really is to allow people the format and the platform to say, hey, I'm feeling blank. And Alex and I talk all the time, why do we do this podcast? And um that's a complex thing, but every time we do it, I feel better. Just saying how I feel in this weird format, it just feels good, and I feel more at peace. Um and it just feels great. Go ahead, Andrew. What?
I don't know if this is a question that I have or a statement or what, but I love everything that you just said, because um, from now editing the podcast, and even though this is our first time actually getting to chat with each other, I've gotten to kind of see a little bit of how your brain works. And I do still love the fact that you have been on this journey of really allowing yourself to open up and feel emotional, but you are also still a man that loves to get shit done. So is there Yeah, I guess I can make this into a question. Is there a way or something that you have noticed within yourself that is allowing you to still become this emotional man while also making sure that you are still being the providing man for the family and still wanting to make sure that you still get everything done?
Yeah, and it's all about that's a super complex question, but because there is a feeling, and I had this feeling actually, and I've said this before, but the reason that I got therapy was not because I wanted to feel my feelings. It was not because I was suicidal, even. I literally got therapy and knew that I needed therapy because I had a deep feeling that with these feelings, with this intense, depression or whatever you want to call it, grief, that I would not be able to provide for my children. And that was the impetus for me. And I think that's a very masculine thing, right? I mean, we have this drive to provide. And that drive got me to the table of therapy. And therapy got me to the table of feeling, and feeling got me back to being able to provide for my family. So, yeah, it's a nice circle. So the answer is it feels like they're mutually exclusive, but they're not. In fact, I think one of my favorite things about women in the workplace, and I know there's still resistance, right? And people, you know, uh, say terrible things about women in the workplace that are just frankly untrue. And they have really taught the masculine dominated workplace that we can actually have a multi-billion-dollar company and do yoga on Thursday afternoons at the office. So, I mean, we've learned a lot that those archetypes that we thought were required are just it's just not fucking true. And I tell a story about medicine is just very generally unhealthy, between codependency and patriarchy. It's just not. It's a really unhealthy workplace. And when I started this business, I sat down with the nurses and the nurses I was going to hire, and I said, "Listen, here's what I would like to do with this new job. If you're interested, I don't know how to have any other relationship, so this is where I want us to start. I want you to be able to tell me what you need and what you want. And I, as the doctor, need to be able to also tell you. Now that's a given, right? I mean, everybody expects the doctor to bark. And I said, but you also can tell me what you need. Now I may not always be able to satisfy that need, but it's important in my workplace that I want to have that we have an open line of communication, and you can tell me that you're tired or you need to take your kids to school or whatever that you need, right? And I'm telling you, ubiquitously, they looked at me like I was absolutely insane. Like they had never heard a physician tell a nurse or a tech or a scrub or an MA or whatever that they were concerned at all with what they need. Um, and it's just, and you know what? My office runs fine. It runs great. We're very productive. We provide great care and we provide incomes for a lot of people, and it's great. So it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be that way, which is, I love women in the workplace because they bring, um, kind of an emotional safe arena. And you can still meet with the insurance agent and you can still balance the books and you can still do all that stuff and cry every so often. You know what I mean? And be overwhelmed sometimes. And all that is part of the human experience. And the truth is, even when you're not saying it, you're still overwhelmed, right? You're just not saying it. You're just not sharing it, and you're shoving it down, and it's unfucking healthy. So I guess the answer is that for me, they're not mutually exclusive, and I think that's important for us to bring to the table. And you're in your 20s, um, and it's honestly, as annoying as generational comparisons can be, and I hate them, and they're super annoying. But some of them you can't get away from. You know what I mean? And I often say about the younger generation, because you're literally one generation or generation and a half behind me. is that the great thing about your generation is you feel generally more comfortable saying what you need and how you feel, which is really wonderful. Like I have my younger employees tell me shit every day that I would never even told my mom, or my dad. I would never ever say the stuff that they say to me daily. And you know what? It's okay. And then as the boss, I just say, look, you know what? I appreciate the fact that you think that you should make $50 an hour. But here's the situation. Here's how you got here. Here's what we're doing. Here's you and you just have that conversation. It's not a big deal. But you know what? They had the wherewithal to tell you, hey, this is what I think I'm worth, which is wonderful. You just can't take it personally. It's not a personal affront. It's just a whole generation of people telling you, hey, we need this, and that's okay. It's just very different, very, very different. I mean, my kids, for example, say shit to me daily that I don't know how my dad would have killed me, but I know he would have killed me if I would have just said, "Go ahead, Luke."
I'm just listening to like everything you're saying, and different things keep popping in my head. Just like yeah, real quick, just to like gloss over something without breaching into the entire other subject it is. When originally Andrew asked you the question, I love that you brought up that you sought therapy, you sought help uh, with the motive to be a better person for your family. Like that is what got you there. That is what made you willing. And I tell my fiance this all the time. I wake up every day and everything I do for her all day long is for her. It's because that drive to provide is so strong. And sometimes that's providing physical security, like bills to, paying bills to uh, keep a roof over our head, to the internet, stuff like that. Sometimes that's emotional security. Sometimes I want her to know that I am in a mental space and I make sure that I remain in a mental space where if she wants to tell me about her feelings, even if it's about how I hurt her feelings, she's welcome to do that. Um, and I have a regular day job. And so web design, web development is actually like a side gig. And, she knows because I've said it before, the fact that I work two jobs is for us, it's for her. It's to make sure that we are never going to be without, despite any financial struggles we'll have. It's to provide. And I love that you mentioned that like that drive to provide literally brought you to seek help to become a better person for your family. And
I think actually one of the key things to being masculine, or seems to be common at least, is practicality. Right? There's a lot of practicality to and one of the practical things that I try to do in my, just like you, it sounds like, is accept some of your inner drives as not bad, right? So some people could frame like this need to provide as patriarchy, right? And it is true that in the extreme, it's for sure unhealthy and patriarchal, right? But it in and of itself can be very natural and normal and healthy and acceptable. But the key is just like you said, it's the conversation was what was lacking before, right? The prior generations didn't have that conversation, that it was okay to feel the need to provide. They just felt the need to provide and felt the pressure to provide, which can be a lot of pressure, without expressing the fact that you feel the pressure to provide. Right. This is a super interesting conversation Alex and I have, because when Alex's husband died, she had to take on all of that provide um, role, and it was extremely challenging for her because really she felt the even stronger drive to nurture her children, right? Not necessarily provide for them, but she was forced into this provide situation, and it was very uncomfortable, and she didn't like it. And I interestingly, like I was pushed into a nurturing situation, and same thing. I was failing miserably, right? I mean, it was a fucking nightmare. So I think some of those roles, even though society may tell you that those um, sex related roles can be bad, and they can be. They're not intrinsically bad. I think that's a key part, and that's actually this therapist is kind of teaching me that, hey, you know what, you the fact that you want to have sex every morning, um, and every evening, and sometimes at noon, is not necessarily a bad. It's okay. It's part. It's okay to be a sexually driven masculine person. That's perfectly okay. Now, I guess just like the providing thing, can it be unhealthy? Absolutely, it can be unhealthy, and I think that's where men really need to define. That's the slippery slope, right? We need to be masculine but healthy, and that's the trick, right? I mean, go ahead, Earl.
Yeah, I don't know if I can equate this to I wanted lazy, but being the provider, that was another one of those things where, hey, men are providers, and you got to work to do the thing, and then and like I said, watch my daddy do it. I watched pops do it, and he worked. I mean, he worked construction for 40 something years, and I see it, and I'm like, wait, I don't know. I don't know if I'm actually supposed to work that hard to provide. And so with that came another awakening for me is that I said, man, how can I make life easier for my wife and at the same time get up every morning and do what I'm supposed to do? And I started to make my money work for me. And don't panic. I'm not a drug dealer. I'm not selling drugs. but it was one of those things that was born out of the my hustle days of being a street pharmaceutical, of making easy money. And it's like, wait, how can I make money while not actually getting up every morning? And so I got the bright idea just to start investing. Now it took some time to convince my wife, because she's like, wait a minute, how could I give people my money? I'm like, you're not giving them your money. It's still access to it. But long story short is that I'm for the since I've been home, I've been fighting against that desire to work myself to the bones to make sure the people around me. I'm cultivating a life now to have it as easy as possible right now. So when I do retire, to be a easy transition. But watching my daddy, man, like I said, it's a lot of aspects that I pray I have from him. A lot of things that I pray I have from, but it's some things that's like, oh, you know what, Pop, you could keep that. You passed on. You could take that with you. I'm gonna do something differently here on out. So yeah.
I look at parents a lot like world religions. You should study them all, and the part that's great you should keep, and the rest you should let it go. Toss it out. I do the same thing. Like I got a lot of great stuff from my dad, and I try to let the rest go. Nobody's perfect. I tell my kids that all the time. I mean, I'm your dad. I'm not a perfect person. I have made mistakes. I'll make more mistakes, and I'm going to continue to make mistakes. But you know what? They're going to be my mistakes. I'm really going to try to not make the same mistakes my dad made. I'm going to try to make my own brand new mistakes. So yeah. Well, that's super interesting, guys. Let's another question. We've hit a lot of this stuff already. The influence of our fathers, which I don't think, again, you can't talk about masculinity without talking about your father. And I would like to talk, because I think everybody on this panel is maybe a little bit different than um, well, people not on this panel, right? For example, 5 years ago, I would not have been on this panel. I would not have participated in any way. I would have shunned this. In fact, I tell this story all the time. I used to watch. I love movies. I watch movies a lot. Um, Always have, and I would watch these occasionally, these romantic movies, and I would scorn them. I would watch the movie and go, like, why is Hollywood so obsessed with love and emotions and all? This sucks. I mean, and that was before. So that was the kind of person that I was before. Now I seek out those movies, because they're great. Um, but the point is that I think we're a little bit different. So I think we need to maybe spend a little bit of time talking about why we have these thoughts. Earl, I'm sure you have probably a similar conversion story to some people, which people will be able to relate to. And Lou, your story is definitely going to be unique. How you um, turned, and everybody on the podcast knows my story, that I was dead ass asleep in a very unhealthy male, providing, but that's about it. And my wife died and forced me into looking in the mirror. So let's start with Andrew. I know you're the youngest person on the panel, but obviously you've thought a lot about this stuff. Can you point to something in your life that made you? And I also want to say I really appreciate you sharing about your dad. I know that's super emotional, and I definitely am glad you shared that. That was really really nice, and we're super sorry for all that happened to you. But was there something that made you think, maybe feelings are not that bad. Maybe I should let these things in and
Like a wake up moment of with my emotions, I think, like I said, I've always been a fairly emotional human because I was only raised by women, a mom, an aunt sometimes before she died of cancer. I had my grandmother sometimes. Um, all of my cousins are females, all the ones that I saw, anyways. So it was literally all them. The only other like men in my life were my two little brothers on my mom's side. My mom raised three boys on her own, so she was a soldier, that's for sure. Um, I don't necessarily know if there was, off the top of my head, anyways, one moment that made me um, think that my emotions were okay, or at least that it's okay for me to have them. But I was also, when it came to my emotions, I was always pretty afraid of them because I thought they were so intense. And with that, I had incredible anxiety. I've been hospitalized twice for my anxiety, having panic attacks nonstop, pulling my hair out of my head, blacking out. I would have panic attacks multiple times a week during the day, and then I would also have them most nights whenever I was asleep as well. So I was just scared all the time. So um, I I think for a very long time I was consistently afraid of my emotions until, like I said, I don't think there's one exact moment, but it wasn't until I really started doing yoga and actually moving my body that helped me move the emotions out of my body, that I started to realize that there's nothing that there's no reason to be afraid of them, and that you're able to work with them and let them be a part of you instead of control you. So then yoga honestly was the thing that helped me to be um, less reactive to my emotions and more so friends with them. Um, I kind of started to look at my emotions as like the third person, third person kind of point of view. Whenever I journal, I would write down like you instead of I a lot. I don't know, it helped me out anyways. But yeah, I don't. There wasn't a one exact moment, but like the coming together was yoga.
Earl, what about you? What made you start to think that maybe life was a little bit different than and feeling and all that, your emotions? When did you start letting that happen? Or was it a lifelong journey, kind of like Andrew so far?
Um, it was a build up, it was an actual build up. It was actually I it's the end of it that I had to go back and see that it was an actual build up, that I had to do something different, and it it had a lot to do with drugs and alcohol. and a lot to do with drugs and alcohol. And it became this to a point where the thing that I was using to stop from feeling, it stopped working. And it became like this insatiable thing that just wasn't doing it. And I knew for a long time, I knew for a very long time that the thing that did it, that shut down all the emotions, the mind tremors, all those things just wasn't doing it. And but it wasn't until later on when I actually got to prison. I say got to prison like I actually just went there and said, "Hey, let me in." When I was taken off to prison, that I had hurt my back on the way to prison, and the doctor was giving me these exercises. The Superman pose. That's what he was. He was labeling them as Superman pose and these different poses, and I would do them, and you gotta picture this. Now I'm in prison doing these poses, like laying on my rack, and I'm doing like these poses. I'm bending my back. I'm laying on my stomach, which is kind of like in prison. It's like don't lay on your back. You know what I mean? And I'm doing all these stretches, and guys are looking at me funny, and it made me feel better physically, but also what it did was it made me pay attention to the pain in my body. And later on, I found out I was doing yoga. I said, what the? After I got out of prison, I found out. Oh, I was telling this group of women that did yoga. I was telling them about what I was doing. Like, oh, that's yoga. I'm like, no, that's not. You said it was Superman poses, but he said Superman poses. Y'all talk about lotus flower and the posture, So, but anyway, I found out I was doing yoga in prison, and but what I found out too was that with those yoga poses and combined with meditation, 'cause I would meditate a lot. I would sit on my rack and I would meditate, and I would sit on my rack and I would hear everything around me. And with that came hearing what was going on around me, but also feeling what was happening in me because of what was going on around me. They're not quiet enough. They're not this. They're not, they're making all this noise. The fan is. And I'm like, well, I be damned. I say, just to sit here with myself. And it was a hard thing to do, just to sit there quietly and have my feelings say, get up, Earl. Go sock that guy in the mouth because he's making noise. He see you over here meditating. Earl, man, listen, you're feeling that thing. You know what? Get up and scream and yell. It was extremely hard to not do anything. And it hit me. I said, wow. So that's what meditation is, to not do anything in the moment. And long story short, I don't want to drag on this story, but I was in it was in prison, the unlikeliest place that I found like this new step in my spiritual journey of meditation combined with movement. That and I reflect on it. I'm like, damn, that's wild that I was in prison doing yoga, the lotus flower, and with meditation along with journaling. That my spiritual life I couldn't contain it at that point. I couldn't contain it, because it was on my way to prison. I was focused on all of the things that I wouldn't have that had gotten me to that point. But what I found was I could take my spiritual practice any and everywhere, and the my experience, I could take it everywhere. And yeah, it's a wild journey, man. It's definitely a wild journey, to but the meditation, journaling, and yoga practice was the thing that like put my spiritual life in a whole nother like realm, so yeah.
Yeah, Earl, I first of all, thank you for sharing that. Um, that was really powerful. And yeah, I think stillness, which yoga is kind of in that realm of stillness in your own body, is so powerful and scary, 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 scary. The first time I have thought that many times. In fact, for 46 years, I can't remember ever being still. Like I would never stop moving. I was always doing something, or you know, either if not working, I was playing as if I was working. That kind of thing. And when Betsy died, I it just happened to coincide with COVID, and I was stuck inside myself, quiet, and it was very difficult and very powerful, just to take. And I can see, like, once you can be still, you can look around, you can kind of be the observer, and you can really see the lack of stillness in so many people and so many parts of our society. Lou, what about you? Was there a moment or a period where you had to change, or
I'm not sure that. uh,
no is an acceptable? Yeah, it's fine. That's what we're here for.
Go very, very, very deep. There's a multi-step experience spanning over 20 years. I mentioned earlier on that I had been seeking mental health care since I was 14. But looking back on it, I can definitely tell you that I started displaying very obvious signs of mental illness probably around sixth grade. So it's like, what, 11, 12, 13, something like that. Um, and as, a preteen, young teenager, I absolutely could not be still with my own emotions, especially when those emotions, quite frankly, were I want to die. Um, I was very, very seriously depressed and I didn't know how to handle it. And eventually, I, just like Earl, drugs and alcohol are a huge part of my story. And I started those things at, like, I think I was 15. I was already 16, I know for sure, but I think it might have been like toward the end of 15 years old. Um, and they filled me up with blankness and I didn't have to feel anything. And that's exactly what I wanted. Um, and I couldn't sit with those feelings. Feelings were absolutely not okay with me. So I did everything I could with those drugs and that alcohol and everything like that to not feel. Because in my head, and the experience that I had as a person, as a teenager, especially with all those hormones on top of it, was that, like, feelings were absolutely not okay. Um, and then at 18, I got sober, and just like Andrew, I was hospitalized at the psychiatric hospital in New Orleans 3 times in 2013. Um, and truthfully, that sounds terrible, but it saved my life. And I got a little nugget of a revelation that acknowledging my feelings was okay, and in fact, it saved my life because I had wanted to kill myself, and B, that asking for help actually can help. Which was, when we're filled with all these terrible negative emotions and trauma and everything like that, before you have any experience, before you take any action, there's nothing in your mind that's intellectual enough to convince your emotions that asking for help is okay. Because all you have is experience with your emotions. You don't have any experience with the facts, which is that if you ask the people that love you for help, they're going to do so. So that's like the first inkling I got. And then, thankfully I got sober and I stayed sober, and I learned a lot in my rediscovery of myself as a person that wasn't using drugs and alcohol to deal with my emotions. And that included, regularly going to therapy and, making sure I had the right diagnoses so that I could be medicated for those things. And I have several. Mental illness is part of my story. It is an integral part of who I am. And I think that at one time I felt a little bit shameful about that, but now I'm very proud of the fact that um, while, I wasn't surrounded by people growing up who had the mental illnesses that I have and everything like that, I am a proud representation uh, of what somebody who is suffering from mental illness can become: happy, healthy, working towards bettering myself all the time and being okay with that. And then I think the final little slice of realizing that my feelings were okay to feel, even though they were fucking terrifying, like feelings can be, like actually acknowledging your feelings to yourself is one thing. But then there's the fear of being, rejected or embarrassed or made fun of or, anything like that by the people you love when you express your feelings to somebody. And that was debilitating for me. And I almost want to say that the fear of this very last step uh, almost removed all of that self-actualization I'd had before, because fear became my being almost. I almost let it completely control my life. And, I think I would have let it continue to, except I remember that one thing about the fact that if I asked for help from people that loved me, I was going to be okay. Um, and I came out to my ex-wife, and I'm not going to go into detail because it's a private matter, but I was very much rejected. Um, and it is still a trauma that sticks with me. The entire experience of coming out as a trans man was glorious to everybody else in my life: my coworkers, my colleagues, my friends. My family was even surprisingly more accepting. But I had this person who, I was married to, and just to state it factually, she very much rejected me. Um, and it was more painful than I could ever tell you, but more liberating than anything I may have ever experienced in my life. Um, and feeling that liberation and like realizing that, that divorce was not the end of my world, was not the end of my existence, was not going to be the thing, that sent me back to the mental hospital or anything like that. It wasn't. It was painful and it was traumatic, and it was, obviously I'd never wish that kind of experience on anybody. But it was an experience of pain that I needed to go through to realize that uh, not only were my feelings okay, but sometimes the negative feelings end up making me better, uh, which was something I think I intellectually knew. Being somebody that needed to get sober and had been in seeking mental health care for so long, that probably been said to me about 150 times, but it doesn't click until you experience it yourself. So realizing that my feelings were okay in the like deepest sense of the word, my bad feelings too, my negative feelings, my painful feelings, my ugly feelings were okay, was the last part of the puzzle for me. It was the last piece, and it fit in to my life to make it the most glorious fucking picture.
Well, Lou, thank you for sharing that. That was a very powerful story. You're right. I'm so glad you're in a place that you can share that with the world. I think we can learn a lot from that. I know I can. And I agree with you 100% with what you said at the end, that like one of the biggest therapy pearls is that conflict and emotional pain and um, those are opportunities, actually, right? When you're asleep like I was for 46 years, you don't have the opportunity to have that growth and that those steps forward. And that's when Alex and I have a disagreement now, which when we had disagreements, right, and we have emotional conflict. it's a tremendous opportunity for us to connect. Um, Whereas, making breakfast and paying the mortgage and making sure everything's done is not so much a connection opportunity, but sometimes the difficult parts, not some, maybe every time the difficult parts really are an opportunity for us to grow emotionally as people, and but that can be very hard to see when you're in it. When you're really in it, which I had never experienced before. But I remember thinking that like I could not see out, and people would tell me all the time, "Oh, it's gonna get better. Do this, do that," and I was like, "No, no, I'm gonna. This is my life. It's gonna be black right up until I kill myself." Um, so it's useful to have the perspective, right? And that's what therapy can really do for you is give you that. Hey, this is hard, but you're gonna tomorrow when you wake up, you're gonna be better, and you'll be a better person, and it's still gonna hurt a little bit, and that's okay. Um, Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been really a pleasure talking with you and learning about all you guys. Um, I think that's a good place to end on a relatively low note. But this is not a ticker tape parade, right? And sometimes emotions can be sobering, and that's okay. Um, Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really that was really good. Earl, did anything else you'd like to add about being a man? I know we got off topic, and that's okay. The truth is, like, it's hard to carve out the unique man experience. It's like this human experience, right? I mean, a lot of this crosses all of the hormonal, sexual, all those boundaries get. Um, a lot of those boundaries they're not real. They're made up the way I feel, very made up boundaries. And a lot of these things we're talking about are, in my opinion, are universal truths, which make them wonderful. But from a masculine point of view, go ahead, Earl.
Say this here, the one thing I've learned since being on this journey about being a man is that if 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 I think I'm doing it right and my wife think I'm doing it wrong, then it's wrong. That's the one. And listen, and I'm saying it may sound funny, but I'm dead serious. And and it always comes when I think what I think is best for her, without asking her or including her in what what the thing should be. Like, oh, I'm gonna go and cut the tree down. Like, no, we needed that tree for shade. Like, oh, you were talking about the leaves and everything, so I just chopped it all down. Like, no, it's not what I wanted to do. So that's when I'm wrong, is when I think what I think she wants, or anybody for that matter.
It's nice to have an intuitive person as part of the equation. Alex is definitely my intuitive person, and I resist that all the time. I remember one time she came and took me to lunch right after I opened my business, and I was super stressed out. I mean, super stressed. I didn't think we were going to hit payroll. In fact, I knew we weren't going to hit payroll, which was super stressful. I got all these people, and I can't pay them, for their first paycheck. And so we went to lunch, and I was not. I was at lunch, right? And she goes, "Listen, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong." She goes, "Are you sure nothing's wrong?" And then she asked me enough times, and I was like, "Listen, stop asking me if something's wrong. When I tell you that nothing's wrong, nothing's wrong. Stop biting me." And she goes, "Fine, that's what you want to be." So we sat there in silence for about 10 minutes. And I was like, "I don't think I'm going to hit payroll for this month." And she was like, "Yeah." But actually, the really fucked up part is that when she asked me what was wrong, I honestly thought nothing was wrong. Like, I really felt like nothing was wrong, but she knew something was wrong. And I have learned just to listen to her, because 99% of the time, something is wrong. I'm acting funny because something's wrong, right? And you just have to learn to listen. So go ahead, Lou.
Actually, that's very relatable because I had to learn, like, after years of therapy, that sometimes if somebody asks me if something's wrong, the answer "I don't know" is completely okay. Uh, I also learned with my fiance specifically that sometimes if I say I don't know, she'll talk me through it and we'll figure it out. Uh, because sometimes I don't know. Sometimes my body's having anxiety, but my mind's not. But maybe it is. I don't know.
It's true, but sometimes somebody else can see it in you, and it's upsetting that somebody else can see into your soul that you can't. You think you should be the first person aware, right? But sometimes you're not, and that's the beauty of interpersonal relations. But now in my prior marriage, I would have fought about that for a week and a half. That'd have been a drag down um, fight. Right, right. Nothing's wrong, right? Anyway, well, that's right. Well, that's an important lesson to learn. Lou, any closing thoughts? Again, I cannot thank y'all enough for coming and exposing your heart and your feelings. I do know that like when you start to share your feelings, it does get easier to share your feelings. And I think that a huge part of this process is to show our listeners, like we get a lot of questions from our viewers um, about um, how do I get my spouse to tell me how he's feeling or tell me how or she's feeling, like we have some sort of magic sauce. Um, but I think actually, honestly, I've learned that a big part of that answer is this podcast where we literally just talk about our feelings. I mean, so that's the whole thing, right? It's not magic. It's just you 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 tell him about your feelings, and then he tells you about your feelings.
Actually, I have some experience in maybe a suggestion for that answer, just based off personal experience. My fiance and I do this thing where uh, most weeks, I'm not going to say we remember every week, but most weeks, one of us, unprompted, out of the blue, when we're both in an emotionally neutral space, and we won't ask each other back to back. It's our responsibility to ask independently uh, to each other this question is that um, we'll ask each other, is there anything that I've been doing that you'd like me to try doing differently? Or is there anything that I have been doing that you like how I've been doing, you want me to continue? Um, and just kind of having that asked while we're in a neutrally emotional space and everything like that. That's why we ask each other separately so that the response of one person doesn't influence the you know feelings of the next question if we ask them back to back. Just making sure that we're on the same page, that we're getting what we need from each other and everything like that. And I actually think right before you asked Earl what he thought, you were saying something about how your feelings are just learning about them as a man is just so interesting and all everything like that. And I think that's something that I've learned having presented female before and now having come to realize that I'm a trans guy is that sometimes you feel things in the same way as every other gender. Not everything is unique to being masculine or a man or anything like that. And sometimes you have things in common with, you know, somebody of the opposite gender as you or a different gender than you. And I think pigeonholing yourself as, being different because you are one way and they are the other is an unfortunate means to alienate yourself. And I think that accepting it is that, like, you actually can have feelings in common with people that aren't just like you is a beautiful truth.
I totally agree. I think it's a disservice to both sexes to say that, "Oh, you're being such a man," or "Oh, you're being such a woman." That it's just, it's it's not real, and that's not to mean that men and women don't have different, perspectives sometimes, and but sometimes those different perspectives have nothing to do with the fact that you're a man or a woman. Just different. Every person has a different perspective, which that's part of the deal. Well, again, Lou, I think when we lost Earl, there he's back. I think we'll wrap it up here, guys. This has been a really wonderful experience. I hope y'all enjoyed it. It's been a real pleasure and an honor. I know it takes a lot to do these kind of things, to really put yourself out there, and that's really part of the message, is that that's okay and that we need to do that more. So um, I think we should go ahead and sign off here, unless somebody else has something else to say. And I want to again thank both y'all. Thank you, Andrew. When you edit this, this is my thank you to you also for doing this. Also, I think it was great to have people of different ages, which was kind of cool, to see where different people are on different uh, stages of the journey of life. And that also transcends, I think, male, female for sure. So thank y'all very much.
This has been Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alex and David Long. Be sure to check out other episodes where our community of experts share tools and ideas to help you wake to the life inside of you. If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for The Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram at The Wake Wellness. Thanks for listening.